How many do we have now?
Sure. 20 something?
20 something?
Yeah.
That's not bad.
Yeah, 20, exactly 20.
20, okay. Okay, that's good, that's good. So I just posted a tweet, so if we all retweet that tweet, maybe we get to 40, you know?
Okay, I think that we can start. Hello everyone. Welcome to the 5th edition of Let It Swift. This time is all in English. We have a bit more international speakers this time. So you can grab a beer if you want. There's fridge open, so and I think we can start.
Maybe mute your MacBook because I can hear ourselves talking.
Sorry.
The terrible echo if you speak yourself and you hear yourself afterwards, you know, it's terrible. Just in time, Marcin. Yeah, perfect. Now I can start. Yeah, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming over. It's a pleasure to be here because it's been a while since I was looking forward to this. I had conversations with 2 Lucases to get here. This is the first Lucas. I looked it up. Just before COVID, this was in January 2020. We were discussing there is no direct flight to Poznan. That happens to be a direct flight from Amsterdam now, so that's one of the benefits of waiting a little longer. But yeah, we tried to come up with a meetup in 2020 already, and then COVID arrived. Lots of things changed. I believe Lucas even changed the company, but he's still here, so that's good. But yeah, then I got another message from another Lucas, and here we are. So super great to be here. I want to take you back. We're going to talk about generics and opaque types and existentials. And that journey for me started at a pretty pleasant event, WWDC 22. And I'm not sure about you, but if I look forward to WWDC, I always try to make my wish list, right? So if I go back to one of the other WWDCs, Swift 4 with Codable, that was quite a big change, right? You had all those kind of dependencies that you could get rid of. Then we had the Boolean.toggle, wasn't that great? I'm mostly naming it because Chris Eidhoff is Dutch and he did a proposal for it, so you know, Dutch roots. Then we had opaque return types. We're going to discuss that today as well. Resources for Swift Package Manager, which was kind of like the last missing piece for us to really embrace Swift Package Manager at WeTransfer. And then finally, async await, you know, long-awaited improvements in Swift. Wasn't that great? And then we had WWDC 2022, and I was like, we got everything. What do we need? I wasn't really sure what to expect, and I was planning to do a talk on something specific to WWDC, so I had to come up with a topic. So I started looking at the Swift 5.7 related proposals. This is a list of everything that was included there. I think if you look at the sessions, you had regex builders and distributed actors, quite a lot of different topics. Nothing really stood out for me yet. And then I looked at the Swift-specific sessions. We had Embrace Swift Generics and Design Protocol Interfaces in Swift. And that second one was interesting to me because I was like, we could have had that in 2015 already, isn't it? Like, you know, when protocol-oriented or programming was the thing. And we'll get back to that later. But these are the proposals specifically related to those WWDC sessions. And when I started looking into it a bit more in depth, there started to become a pattern. We have opaque types, existentials, associated types. And suddenly I realized this must be like one of the bigger changes that we received this year. Now Swift is open source, and that means that you can also see what has changed in every version. And this is a PR. Only 2 files changed, and in those files nothing much changed. But the list of bugs that got fixed with this. Those are all links to radars. also known as feedback assistant issues that you submit. But quite a lot of things related to generics were improved. And altogether, we could sum up that this year is pretty much about, protocols, opaque types, existentials, and generics. So my journey started for my talk, and this is a generics proposal from a few years back, the generics manifesto that was used in the roadmap towards Swift 3. And one thing that stood out was removing unnecessary restrictions. And this became a pattern along the way. Ben Cohen, John Sandel, I think you all know who John Sandel is. We're in Poland. I believe he's living somewhere nearby. But Ben Cohen was in that podcast and he said, make generics work naturally, the way people expect it to work, without unnecessary restrictions, you could say. So let's go back, and I mentioned it earlier, protocol-oriented programming. Who recognizes this guy? By any chance? This was quite a thing in 2015 at WWDC, because this was, I think, the most hyped talk from that year. Protocol-oriented programming was the next big thing, and everybody started to do that, use protocols everywhere. But in that year, there were some improvements to Swift. And I want to take you through that improvement with this protocol where we have a content with an ID, a URL, and a method make favorite. So what was the case in Swift 1.2? Who wrote for Swift 1.2? Yeah, see a few hands. No incremental builds. Perfect times. Terrible. Either way, so we have an image content and a video content, and they both conform to the protocol content. But at that moment, we had to implement the make favorite method individually in each instance. So we couldn't write a protocol extension as we do today. And that was exactly what was introduced in Swift 2. Protocol extensions allowed us to reuse logic for all the types that conform to a certain protocol. And to me, this was already an example of removing unnecessary restrictions. So it's almost like a red line in the improvements we see in Swift. This is another quote I took from a WWDC session, and this is saying Swift's goal is to make your life as a developer easier, and define easier, right? I'm not sure about you, but look at all these keywords, does this make it in any way easier? We have so many different types and things to think about, and it makes it pretty hard to all understand, especially if you just got started with Swift, but maybe as well if you're a bit more experienced. So hopefully today I can make it a bit more clear for you. But one thing I want to embrace here is that, don't think you should actually know everything I'm going to say today, but see it more as an introduction to what Swift offers. And if you really want to dive more deep into these things, you can do that on your own pace, at your own time. Generics are just a tool that you can use, but you can also just reuse code and copy-paste everything in a way, in theory, right? So it's just an extra tool in your tool set. So let's dive in. And I want to start with the basics. Generics basics, it's still pretty advanced, but here we have an int stack, which basically contains all kinds of integers. We can push and we can pop, and we have like a backing store items. We can make this generic, which basically means that you have a generic stack, which can contain any kinds of elements. And if we look at arrays in Swift, it's basically already what we do today. Because what you see here is an array of strings, or a stack of strings. And by reusing the logic of the array, we can also make an array of integers. And we reuse the underlying logic, because the code is generic. We also have generic methods. Here's an example where we find the index of a certain element, and we can compare the value to the value to find. And that's possible because we have a generic constraint. We say this method is only applicable if all the elements conform to equatable, allowing us to compare. You can also create an extension on an array to write the same kind of method, which will look as follows. And if you actually want to use that code, it looks like this. So we have the first global method, then we have the method on the array, and actually this is something available in Swift today in the standard library, making use of generic code as well. The Swift standard library is full of generic code, which obviously makes sense because you don't want to rewrite everything for integers or for strings or for floats and so on. So this code could be rewritten as well to use with strings, and we make use of the same generic code. So that's a short introduction to generics. But how about opaque types? Wolf thinks he's not using opaque types today. Yeah, it's always hard to say no, because you probably realize that you will use it. Yeah, so opaque types are actually something you use in SwiftUI. Here we have the sum view, which is basically saying it's some kind of view that will be returned. But there is an essential part in this, which is related to performance, and it comes down to that the compiler kind of knows by using an opaque type what type it will eventually be, and it can predict the required memory, and with that perform optimizations along the way. So here you could say that if you use a v-stack, the compiler knows it will be a v-stack, so I need to prepare for a v-stack, or it could be a text element or any element that you define. And I used opaque types in SwiftUI this way because were required, but I wasn't really often using it myself in other kinds of methods. And that was an interesting learning for me along this way with this talk. But you can actually use it in different places as well. So an important point is that the opaque type requires you to have a fixed value inside the scope of where you use it. So in this example, we have two options, and it will actually not compile, because in the first if statement we return a text, but in the else we return a v-stack. So in the scope of this method, the return value is not the same. If you look into what is actually returned, the v-stack contains like all kinds of like subtypes as well. And we can solve this, maybe, just place a v-stack around it, right? We now have a consistent v-stack type to be returned. But the downside here is that in case somebody is pro, we could have returned just a text type. And now suddenly we have that extra layer around it. Well, it's not really needed. So one thing you could do here to solve it is using a view builder. And that way you optimize this code accordingly, and you can still make use of a sum view. View builder is a result builder. If you're new to that, I've got an article on that. You can look that up. It's pretty fun what you can do with it. There's all kinds of other solutions you can write with it. So opaque types, how do they relate to generics? And for that, I want to take you through like a real case scenario. This is the WeTransfer application I'm developing in my day-to-day job. We have all kinds of content, so yeah, videos, PDFs, images, you name it. And in this journey, I kind of want to imagine that we want to allow users to favorite content. So we start with the protocol again. We have an image content with an ID, which in this case is just a unique identifier, and we have a URL. And we create a favorite image content store. So this is very generic, or not generic, I must say, because it's fully related to images. And we allow with two methods to check whether something is favorited or to add something to the favorites. And the method to actually do that looks as follows, where we add like a collection of content that we actually want to make favorite. So this all works fine, right? We have image content. It's all suited for image content. And this is also an example where you are perfectly fine without any generics. But as showed earlier, we have all kinds of content. So we also have video content. But if I start using that, the compiler isn't happy because we expect image content. So we want to make this more generic. We have two types in this case, an image content and video content. I'm ignoring all the other types of content for now. And we can bring them together by introducing a protocol content. Both types conform to it, and we can rewrite our code accordingly. We have those two methods. We change it to content, And in Swift 5.6, this was perfectly fine. The compiler is happy, and now we can also favorite video content because the types are joined together by the protocol content. Now there are differences in Swift 5.6 and 5.7, and I want to introduce to you an error that you've seen. I'm pretty sure you've seen that before. So say we actually want to benefit from the identifiable protocol. So we add the conformance, and we basically say that the associated type ID always conforms to UUID. And this way we don't have to provide that ID property anymore, but we can benefit from the identifiable protocol. If we now go back to this code, who has seen this error before? You know, to me, this was like a perfect example of unnecessary restrictions. You know, you write your code, you're like, this should work, it makes sense, right? And then this error shows up, and you're like, okay, I'll go back to the protocol, I referred it, I'll just use the property ID and, you know, whatever. But the good thing is that we can make this actually work in Swift 5.7. And for those that are a bit more experienced, they might realize you can actually make this work in Swift 5.6 as well, using generics. This works. You have T conforming to content to a protocol. We can also write it using the where clause as shown here. But what is new now is that you can use opaque parameter types. And you can write it like this. The interesting part here to me is if you're used to generics and you've written Swift for a few years, it might be harder to wrap your head around this change because you're used to writing generics in the old way. But if you're getting started with Swift, this reads much nicer. If we compare it to the old way, you know, there's way less clutter. What does T even mean? I guess type, but you know, like you could also use all kinds of other names, and then you suddenly have like a type alias while it's not really a type. I don't know. Just using some content makes much more sense. And altogether, you could basically say some protocol stands as a shorthand for T, where T conforms to protocol. There's an important one, because if T is also used in a return value or something, there's a constraint between those places, and then you can't use opaque types. So while at first I thought, you know, I can go over my whole code base and remove all the generics, you'll quickly find out that it's not always possible because it's really like a shorthand for T, where T conforms to protocol if it's used in a single place. You'll understand that later on. So all we know is that there's going to be some kind of value conforming to content. So in summary, the underlying type is fixed for the scope of the value. We saw that in SwiftUI, where, you know, it's either a VStack or a text. That's not possible. It needs to be one single type. If the generic is only used in one place, then we can use some type. Otherwise, it's not possible. That's why it's a shorthand. And if you ask me, it becomes easier to read if you compare it to the old way of writing generics. So we got generics, opaque types, and now I want to take you to existentials. So we slowly build up. I'll go over some practical examples in the end, where it will all come together, which will hopefully make it all click. So we have the favorite image content store, and I now want to zoom in to the favorite method, where we pass in an array of items. And in this case, we have an array of image content, but we want to make this generic as well. So we change it to content, and we see that same error again. Now we can rewrite this as well, using generics, but it's not entirely what we want, and I'll show you. This works great, right? We have an array of image content, and the compiler is happy. But as soon as we change one of those types, there's no consistent type in the scope of the value anymore. So this doesn't work, and Swift can't deal with this. So you might think, let's rewrite this and use some content. But like I said, the type of the value needs to be consistent for the scope of the method. And in this case, it's not consistent. It's either image content or video content, PDF content, can be anything, but we know that it's content. In other words, it's any type of content. And this is where existentials come into place. You lose type relationships because the compiler can't predict anymore. So if there's something specific to image content, the compiler doesn't know anymore, but you will still be able to benefit from all the generic code that you write using existentials. So there is like a break-even point, you could say. So I remember from the WWDC session, they showed kind of like visuals with a box, and then something goes out of the box, and it made it easy to understand for some, but I kind of like wanted to have a better understanding with alternatives written in code. So I want to show you a few. You could basically say that box example that I just mentioned, and you can write it in code like this, but you still have an inner value with any content. So we're still using existentials. So it's not entirely how you would write this before. This though is type erasure that I did use before. You kind of create a container, you initialize it with another type, and you erase the relationship with the actual type. But there's a new any content that we can now start using everywhere. So the favorite method that we just had in Swift 5.6, we could have rewritten it using any content this way. But with the new existentials, it looks much nicer, and we don't have this overhead code to write. So in any case, we have any value conforms to content. And I want to go back a little to the performance that I mentioned earlier. So here, we define a property as any content. And that also means that even though we started with image content, we can still change it to video content. So it's much more dynamic. And that also means that's harder to predict for the compiler and perform optimizations accordingly. With opaque types, the type is the same for the scope of the value. So the compiler knows that it will always be image content in this case, and we can't change it to video content because the requirement is that it has to be image content. So in summary, any protocol stands as any value conforming to protocol. Swift 5.7 adds support for self or associated type arguments. It's basically the error that I showed that kind of like feels like a restriction that is now removed. This is an interesting one. In Swift 6, you will be required to explicitly mention any, and the reason is that Swift wants you to know, the Swift team wants you to know that you're opting in for that extra performance hit. So you should consider rewriting it to opaque types or something that's more predictable for the compiler. How big is the performance hit, you can say? It's probably, for most apps, too small to say like, okay, I'm gonna optimize all this code, but it's something to be aware of and also something to look at, because in my experience, Xcode recommends using any, while in many cases you could use some as well. And I'll show that in an example later. Since it's unpredictable, performance hits. For those that watched carefully during WWDC, this looks very much like one of those slides that were in the session, but this time I actually show code examples with it to compare some to any, and it shows that with some content, the type for the scope of the value is the same, and I'm repeating this a lot because that it hopefully will click. And with existentials, we can use any type, but we lose the relationship. So in the left example, you can say it's all image content, and when you deal with some content, in this case, you actually get the relationships from image content, and in the second one, with any content, you'll deal with just the protocol content. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm using Twitter a lot. I'm not sure if I'm doing that in a few months still, but this was one of the trending topics at the time, and you saw that image popping up everywhere. And Ben makes a good point that from the implementation side, it looks like you're using the same thing, but it's actually something different underneath if you look at existentials and opaque types. I found it funny and quite related to this talk, but I want to take you to some practical examples with all the things that we just learned. First of all, we have this print method. And if you look at this code, we can say T conforms to protocol, and we have a shorthand for that. So we can rewrite this and using some. I actually went through the code base today as a coincidence for WeTransfer and found quite some places where I could apply this change. It's quite an easy change, if you will. Up next, if you're developing SDKs that are used publicly. Maybe you have an open source library, or maybe your company is actually developing a library. It's pretty important to think about what you make public and what not. And in this case, we have a remote image fetcher, which is defined as public, which means that if we happen to rename remote image fetcher to a different name, all the implementers are required to rename as well. It becomes a breaking change. You need to major bump your version. It's not ideal. So let's see if we can rewrite this. So we introduce a new protocol, image fetching, and with that we can actually already apply this change. You can see that the remote image fetcher now becomes non-public, and implementers of the SDK only have to deal with an image fetching protocol. This works great, but as soon as we start introducing an associated type, we run into issues, and it makes sense to introduce this associated type image because we might have a UI image or an NS image, right? If your SDK becomes multi-platform. So we need to solve this, and this is a place where Xcode would recommend you to use any. Now this could be true, right? Like it might be an existential, but it all has to do with the scope of the method. Is the value consistent or not? So by now we can't really tell because we don't see the inner body. So let's have a look. In this case, the value inside the scope of the method is not consistent. We either have a local image fetcher or we have a remote image fetcher, so it makes sense to use any in this case. However, if we were to always return a remote image fetcher, the type of the value is consistent inside the scope of the method, so we can define some, benefit from performance improvements, and keep the type relationships. Say we want to introduce a nice extension as well, where we can use that image fetcher to quickly configure an image to an image view. In this case, we can't assign image because we don't know what it is. Do we know that it's an NS image or a UI image? This code doesn't work right now. This is another feature that was introduced, and these are constrained existential types, and it's using the primary associated type. I'm using a lot of names. You can look up the proposals later on, where it will be explained in more depth. But what it will allow us to do, by defining a primary associated type image here, we can actually add constraints to the existential type as well. So in this case, we say any image fetching as long as the associated value is of the type UI image. And now the compiler can predict and allows us to set the image accordingly using the generic image fetcher that we defined. For those that are very sharp here, we could actually rewrite this and using opaque types and use constrained opaque types. And now I'm in need of a coffee as well. No worries. So I was wondering what would be questions you might have after seeing this talk, and I figured this would be one of them. And if I pronounce this, it sounds exactly the same, but there's a difference between any view and any view. Lowercase or uppercase, either way. I never really used any view either way. The first one, that one. So I don't think you need it at all. But this was actually answered in the WWDC Slack, which is full of super interesting questions that you can still look up. There's some articles that copied over all the interesting questions, and this was one of them. And in most of the cases, you should be able to solve this using View Builder or existential any. So I don't think. Let's say if you still use any view, see if you can rewrite it, because I'm pretty sure there should be ways to do that. Another one, does any relate to any or any object? For that, I want to recommend reading my article. I went into depth there. Short answer, no, but there's more in-depth answer to it if you're interested. So, wrapping up, and I want to give you some summary guidance, so to say. Try to start with some, if the generic parameter is only used in one place. If you're not sure about is it used in one place, try to use some and you will quickly notice, because the compiler won't be happy. But yeah, if you can use some, that would be great, because I think readability improves. Change some to any, when you have like arbitrary types or more random values, like we saw with the array, where it's not only image content, but also potentially video content or any kind of content. And lastly, you can still use generics as the final solution. It's still available. This is just another option in our toolbox. Who's still feeling overwhelmed? I can imagine, like it's quite a lot. And like I said before, don't see this as something you now must use everywhere. I tried to use it in the WeTransfer code base and I found it pretty hard as well myself. I'm still learning. It was actually pretty hard to wrap my head around this myself for this talk, and I'm still learning. But yeah, take it step by step, take it easy. You're at least familiar with this concept now, you know that it exists. Yeah, and use that to see if you can actually apply it. The benefit of me preparing a talk is that I prepare it by writing articles. So there's an article on opaque types, existential any, all the generic stuff that I discussed. So you can look up those articles and read it up on your own speed. Briefly mention of some of the other things that I write and do. We have Swiftly the articles, a newsletter. If you don't follow it yet, it can be a great way to not miss any Swiftly articles or any articles from the community. Or if Swift Studio ever comes live, maybe I can post that in my newsletter. And Swiftly Jobs, it's a new version. If you know the old version, this one is much better. You can actually upload your own profile as well and get in touch with interesting companies. Yeah, maybe it's something for you. I did this talk in Frankfurt, which made a lot more sense to show this. I'm not sure if it makes much sense for you, but this is about investing in stocks and such. It's a side project that I have. Maybe you find it interesting. Come to me and I'll show you the test flight link again. But this one, who uses Rocket Sim? Only one hand? I always hope to see 0 hands because that means 30 new users, But nevertheless, yeah, Rocket Sim is a simulator enhancing tool. It allows you to create recordings with bezels, with touches, convert it into Giphy, but as well, all the folders, delete derived data really quickly, reset permissions, super handy if you're working on push notifications and all those kind of things.
And cleaning derived data.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. As well as showing a grid on top of the simulator or using rulers to align objects or compare design on top. Well, all kinds of features. Check it out. If you are a fan of Rocket Sim, I have some pins with me. If you're not a fan and you want to become a fan, you can still get a pin. That's fine. With that, I want to thank you for your attention and hopefully you learned something today.
I'll just switch on the audience mic.
Yes.
I'm assuming that there is a question segment right now.
Questions are the hardest part of giving talks, You can't prepare that.
I have a question. I feel overwhelmed.
Yep.
By what is how this generics works right now.
Yep.
And do you think that we should more use composition than generics, or generics are the good way?
It's very much a choice, I would say. And there's many aspects to that choice, right? If you decide to use generics because you're convenient with it, but you're working with a team of 10 developers, you're kind of pushing them to learn generics as well or deal with generics. And I'll be honest, composition is probably much easier to manage. I rewrote a lot of code in generics and ended up rewriting it again because I eventually got stuck, right? So if you look at the image fetching example, I like the generic solution in the end very much, but it might be pretty hard to get to that place. So yeah, I would say pick a solution that's convenient for you, but definitely try to challenge yourself to write it using generics and maybe use it like a timer, right? Say to yourself, okay, I tried generics, but I only spent an hour on it. And if it's not finished within that hour, I'll stick with composition because I'm familiar with that. That would be my suggestion.
I didn't follow if anything changed in that regard. So the performance of the generics across the border of the module is bad because it happens in runtime as so specialized.
Yeah.
Did anything change in that regard? Because if you have an app that is modularized, that would affect your performance.
Yeah, so I think this is the general answer, right? If you use existentials over opaque types in terms of performance, right? So you kind of move the performance hit to runtime because it's dynamic and the heap memory can't be predicted as much as you can with opaque types. And I'm not entirely sure because you mentioned packages, and I see you're still confused or not giving. I'm giving not the answer that you need.
No, there used to be the case that the standard library, they use the generics a lot.
Yeah.
They have this underscore specialize, and actually not even that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a special pass on the compilation that specializes the type. Did anything change in that regard for the non-standard library, for the regular modules? I'm
not sure if anything changed there. That's the honest answer, because I'm not familiar with it as well as much as I wish I was for answering this question. But you saw the PR that I mentioned, quite a lot changed in terms of generics, and I believe the build time improvements of this year were mostly related to that as well, because the compiler can much better predict how generics should be used. So I'm unable to give you the exact answer, but it could very well be that something changed there because a lot happened in that area. Could be interesting to look that up and see on the Swift forums or anything. Any more questions?
You skipped one thing.
Oh!
Which is extensions to the protocols.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a limitation there with the self. Do you have any comment on that? When you use a self
Mm-hmm.
in a function that is, the extension to the protocol, that is the default implementation, there's like a limitation. You cannot use that, and there's a very bad workaround with that. Are you familiar with that?
Okay. I'm not sure. If you use like self, the word self.
Yeah, in constraints.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one thing that currently applies is the reason it's also called Swift 5.7 and we got Swift 5.8 and not Swift 6 is because they're still on that roadmap to make the final end of the roadmap to Swift 6, right? So a few things that I already have working but didn't activate are kind of still being worked on. So this is more a generic story I want to share is that we're not there yet. And this is very much one of the first iterations, I believe, on existentials and opaque types and such. And it will improve over the upcoming versions. Probably I have seen this, but I'm not sure which limitation it is. But at least I don't have an answer to it. You have good questions, I guess. But show it afterwards. I'm keen to see it.
There was a question on the chat.
I was
really technical.
I was curious, actually. Yeah.
Whether you could repeat questions, but yeah, and I think that this discussion would be not so easy to repeat. Well, actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
Because when I tried it, to play with it when Xcode 14 beta came out.
Yeah.
I thought that this Swift features would have much more impact that it eventually had for me.
Mm-hmm.
Have
Similar experience, yeah. Yeah, so like I said, actually today I started looking through the whole code base and see where I can apply this new changes. And at least to me, the error that I showed earlier was something I run into every now and then as a limitation. And at that point I was like, God damn it, but it only happens now and then, right? Like how often do you really write generic code or reusable code in such way that you go to the limitations of Swift? Mm-hmm. So I kind of have the same feeling if you describe it this way, right? You have the idea this has such a huge impact, especially in the WWDC session. They were like, poof, and it's gone. That error, that's literally what he did. So you were like, oh, damn it, this is great. This opens up doors. But yeah, no, it doesn't have such an impact on the retransfer code base either. But I also feel like it's harder in retrospect to rewrite code than it is to when you actually write a solution from scratch, where you naturally write code, you expect it to work, and you now no longer have the limitations that you had before. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but yeah. It's like a different angle of approach, which has an impact, I think.
Yeah. because I felt like I had a protocol with associated type that also confirms the protocol.
Yeah.
And I thought that I would be able to make it more readable somehow.
Yeah.
And not have all this where
Yeah.
stuff, etc. And but
yeah. There's only a few places where you can do that, and I think if it's the generic is only used as a parameter, it should always be possible to do it. But as soon as you start to reuse that same constraint in different places, or another limitation I saw is if you use a generic .type, because you want to use like static methods or something, you can't define that as an opaque type. So it has to be an actual instance, if that makes sense. So there's still a few limitations that I totally believe will be removed in the future, but for now, yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay. Well, if there's any other questions as well for the chat, feel free to always post me a message on Twitter. I'm not on Mastodon yet, but I still hope we will survive. But nevertheless, for those here, we can also discuss anything that you want. So, thanks a lot. Now I can drink a beer as well,
Okay, I think now it's Agis and Katerina. You have, 5 minutes to grab a beer, and and let's set up.
Yep. Everyone's ready? Okay, we can start. So, first of all, thank you for inviting us tonight to this meetup. I'm Agis, along with Katerina. We are going to talk about how we made a legacy app accessible. What we did right, what we did wrong, many things, and what we learned along the way. So we currently both work at Wire. It's a secure communication platform, and this is going to be the agenda for tonight. First of all, we are going to talk about the process of making a plan to tackle the project of making a legacy app accessible. Then we are going to separate the talk in 3 areas: colors and contrast, dynamic type, and voiceover. Then we are going to talk about how we tackle the problems that they arise in each of one of those 3 areas, the lessons that we learned in each of those areas, and the tools that helped us to make our app accessible. So, how the project started. We got a review from one of our clients, an accessibility review. They found a couple of issues that we needed to take care on and fix. And yeah, initially, because of the scope of the project, our initial reaction was something like this. Yep, one of my favorite movies, by the way, Home Alone. But we took a step back and
we understood that we need to make our own research to understand that we have enough knowledge about accessibility and that we don't miss anything important. So we are starting with reading Apple guidelines, checking tools, books, and also having the review from our client. We came up with a plan, and it was like this. So we defined 3 areas that we would like to and we need to work with. It's dynamic type, colors and contrast, and voiceover. Now we will talk more about all of these areas.
So, we start with dynamic type. We had a couple of issues. First of all, dynamic type was partially implemented throughout the app. So in a couple of screens it would work, in other screens it would not work. So that was kind of problematic. The second thing was that dynamic type was implemented in a different way in many parts of the app, different ways of handling fonts and and so on. So that was also problematic for us. The third problem was that we had to support dynamic type based on our current system of how we handle fonts. And it's kind of an old system and it's kind of a complicated one. So that was another problem that we had to take care of. And the fourth one is that we had to make sure that dynamic type works and looks great in all languages, but especially English and German. So regarding the fourth one, imagine having to deal with long German words in all of content sizes, category changes and sizes. So yeah, kind of a tough one. So this is part of our current implementation regarding fonts. So we had like a font size, we have a text style, and so on. So that's how we define our fonts. And this is not just it. We had a couple of extensions and other things that make the current implementation kind of complicated and really hard to work with. But we had to come up with a solution that didn't require us to refactor our whole font scheme code, because that would require a lot of work and a lot of time. So we came up with using not generics but protocols. We came up with a protocol. So this method is called where the preferred size category changes. After that, we created two extensions for UI view and UI view controller to call this redraw font method whenever we change the user changes the content size category, as you can see. And the third part is to call this redraw all fonts method into our root view controller. So every time someone changes the size of the text, we get informed and we present the correct text size. But you may ask, what happens with buttons, labels? What do you do with those things? For those things, we created base classes such as dynamic font button and later dynamic font label. We conform to dynamic type capable. We pass a font spec to the title label in this case, and every time we change the size of this label, it automatically updates. So as soon as we initialize this label with a font spec, it updates automatically, which is pretty cool. The same thing happens with dynamic font button. This is also one of our newest base classes, where we conform to dynamic type capable, and then again the same thing, we update the font size. So may sound like a few things, but we learned a lot of things through this process. One of those things were learning to work along with the constraints that you may have can be a powerful tool, and that applies to the entire accessibility project. We had like a lot of constraints, mostly time constraints and people working on the project. So initially we were the only two working on the project, so we had to figure out a way to not refactor the entire code base, but also come up with a solution that fixes the issue that came up from the client. So our solution was like the best of both worlds. We still have to refactor our code sometime in the future, but at the same time we came up with something that is really well thought out. The second thing is that if you know, most of the tests, most of the big projects, they also have like a test suite, and based on the major and big changes that we made, we had like an impact on our test suite, so we had to make changes there. We had to change base classes, and so if you are planning on making those kind of changes into your own project, make sure to first of all have like a test suite that you can verify your changes and nothing breaks. We broke a lot of things, but we fixed them. Yeah, so that's the takeaway from that one. The second area that I would like to talk about is colors and contrast. And this is one of the areas that we spend most of the time on. mostly because we had to make a lot of changes in a lot of places. Again, working with an old system and trying to come up with a new one to replace the old system. So the problems that we had here was like four main ones. So contrast was failing in many places throughout the app, and that was one of the biggest issues. The second thing was from our engineering perspective, we didn't have a defined color palette to work with, and also we were using a custom old method to switch between light and dark mode. So that adds up to the problems that we had to deal with. The third thing, and another important one, was that we didn't have a defined way to set colors for different UI elements and their state. So we would set the colors for buttons, styles, whatever the UI element is, in a different way. And the fourth one is a redesign with a question mark, which I'm planning to talk more about a bit later. So contrast was failing in many places throughout the app. That was one of the biggest user-facing issues. It was happening in a lot of places, especially in places where we had small text or blurry background. Blurry background such as this one. So as you can imagine, it's really hard to read text and interact with text when the background is blurry and you cannot control the color value. So that led us to our second problem and got us thinking, how can we start working on colors and contrast? Where do you start? What you decide to pick on first? So our second problem was that we didn't have a defined color palette. We had a color palette, but it wasn't constructed in a way that it will help us with our accessibility goals. And actually, we didn't have kind of a source of truth. Many know this phrase from SwiftUI, but we didn't have a source of truth when it comes to our colors. So this is a big problem, like a big endeavor, how we are going to set the colors and how we are going to set our color scheme is going to play a big role on how we implement other things such as styles later on. So we used something called semantic colors. So for people who are not familiar with semantic colors, is a way of naming colors based on how they are used, as opposed to their hue or color. And our naming convention was usage, content, and after that state. But before I can show you our semantic colors file, let's take a step back and think about colors first. So regarding colors, we got our color palette or color values from our designers, and we created colors.exe assets file. This file now rarely gets touched because all of the color values are there, so we don't have to touch it anymore. One of the benefits of having this kind of file is the visual aspect. You can see all of the colors, but you may ask, how can you use them with code? So as a second step, we used a tool called SwiftGen. Many of you may be familiar with the tool, and we were able to generate all of the colors in code. So it's way easier to work with, and the tool did all of the tedious work for us. Well, as a third step, we had to create a new initializer for UI color, taking color assets as parameters based on if we are using dark or light mode. And then we come up to the semantic colors. This is part of the semantic colors files. As you can see, this is all the colors related to the button. And also you can also here see the naming convention. So now you can say, okay, you have the colors, you are done, that's it, this is a way of implementing, and you can go ahead and implement everything you want and that's life. Well, we had another issue that we had to deal with. Themable was our previous way of implementing colors, and user interface style was the new way that we wanted to implement colors. And the thing is that Themable was even older than UI user interface style when Apple released their way, or like their light and dark mode. So yeah, Wire is kind of an old product. So an example of how like Themable worked is like, again, a protocol, and this is part of the definition. So I can give you an example here where in many cases, like models, when you would want to switch from light to dark mode, you will have to dismiss the view and then bring back the view again, so you can see the changes happen in real time. That doesn't happen with UI user interface style, so that's one of the main kind of differences. So we had two different systems working in two different ways in parallel, and yeah, before saying anything, I can say that this made our designers really confused, because some of the elements would change the color based on light and dark mode, some of the elements would not, because they were in model, so we didn't have the chance to work on those screens just yet. And we would have designers coming and say, oh, this element doesn't work, or this doesn't change, or we have this kind of problem, and trying to explain them that we have two different systems was confusing for them, of course, and kind of confusing for us as well, because we couldn't like communicate well. Well, now a question for you. We have all of these kind of elements. Does anyone know what all of those elements have in common? Any guesses? The states. Every one of those elements have different states, such as highlighted, selected, enabled, or not. So now we land into our third problem, which is we didn't have a defined way to set colors for different elements and states. And here I would like to mention, if anyone wants to take a look at the code and not part of the code, everything is open source on GitHub, so you can go ahead there and take a look at the entire thing. So yeah, initially we had different classes implementing and setting colors in a different way, like icon button, icon style, whatever that may be. And that was pretty confusing and unproductive, because if you decide, okay, I'm going to create a new button or I'm going to create a new class, which way are you going to set the color? It's kind of confusing, and yeah, made us feel something like this, trying to figure out which is the correct way and so on. So again, we had to take a step back and think, okay, we need to find like a common way of setting colors and setting the styles for those elements. So again, we used protocol, where the implementation should update the style of the UI element based on its state. And from there, it was pretty straightforward to create different kind of styles, such as button style, where, as you can see, we have normal state colors, highlighted state colors, and selected state colors, and we set the colors like that. Another case can be switch style, and how we set the colors there. For switch style, we went a step further and we created a class where you can like initialize the switch with a style as soon as you create it. Now I want to take a moment and mention two small things that we found that may help you on your journey of making your app more accessible and working with color. So one thing should be border colors are not dynamically updating for dark mode. So if you want to do something like that, you have to use trait collection did change. and update the color there. And the second thing is that applying a tint color for images and icons is also something that many people are not kind of aware of. So to do that, you have to set the rendering to template, as we do in set template icon method, and then set the tint color for that image or icon. Huge thank you to Antoine, because we were able to learn a lot from his blog and improve our own code. And the fourth thing that I want to talk about is kind of a redesign with a question mark. So how that happened. Oh, sorry. These are some of the screens that we had in Figma. And initially the project started as like quick wins, something that we can fix easily and then push out and all of that. So one day we had a conversation with one of the designers after we made the initial planning for the project. And she said that no, the screens need to look exactly like they look on Figma. So that messed up our entire planning, and we learned a lot of lessons. And any idea what the first lesson is? Any guesses? Communicate early and often. Communicate early and often with your peers, with your designers, with your product managers. Show your work, build prototypes. And as a lesson, it's better to over-communicate than under-communicate. The second lesson that we learned the hard way here is extend instead of replacing existing code. So I can give you an example here. You may have a view, like a footer view, and you change the color for that view, but you use that view in many different places across the app. That leads to changes in a ton of screens. In our case, changes to a lot of snapshots. Also leads to big pull requests, 300 and more files. And two systems again working in parallel. That doesn't look good, and it doesn't work well when other people want to review your work. So what should we do instead? Like extend the code, create new classes, or adapt or create new initializers. What I mean by creating new classes, for example, in this case, we wanted to override is selected and is highlighted, but on icon button is being used in many different places across the project. But we were just working on a specific screen and we wanted to make a change there. So instead of going to icon button and make the change there and apply that change to everything across the app, we created a new class and we overrided those two properties. That can be helpful because it will keep your changes to the minimum. Second thing is adopt or create new initializers. This is the first initializer that we had for the dynamic font label. As you can see, it takes a color and a variant as a parameter, but we had to change that and instead use color. But we didn't delete the previous initializer and replace it with that. We created this new one because, again, we didn't want to break what worked already. So another interesting lesson, I guess, that I would like to share is keep track of your future changes that you need to make. As you work on the project, you may realize, oh, I need to change that, or I need in the future to make this refactor or whatnot. So it's going to be easier if you keep a log. This is my log as an example. I have like a text file where I keep all of those stuff in changes that you need to make in the future. Then you can create tickets and inform the team that we need to make those things. So I found that to be really valuable. So now my colleague is going to talk about all of the work we did over at VoiceOver.
Yep. So the third area we were working on, and actually still work, it's VoiceOver. VoiceOver is a screen reader that makes it possible to use iPhone, iPad if the user cannot see the screen. And we had a few issues with VoiceOver as well. One of them, that app has never been tested actually by VoiceOver, and some accessibility property were implemented randomly. Some of the elements didn't explain their purpose. For example, that this element is heading or is editable. Some elements didn't have a translation and only has an English version, since we have many clients from different countries and they use their localization. So this was one of the critical bug. And keyboard traps. Keyboard trap means that user couldn't change the focus to another element, and application doesn't provide any navigation alternatives. We started with to making testing and collecting the correct strings together with the design team and our copywriter. On this screen you see two examples how we did it. Actually, the list was very big and we cover all the elements, all the screens. It was a huge manual work, but at the end it was very useful. In the meanwhile, we were checking application how far away we are from the standards. And one of the standards is WCAG. It's a guideline, web content accessibility guideline. This standard applies to both web pages and mobile application. And the purpose of the standard is defined how to make content more accessible for people with disabilities. So there are three levels. 1A, it's basic standard, 2A and 3A, it's kind of a gold standard. Also, another guidelines was useful from Apple. I would recommend for someone who is working with accessibility or will work. Next, we would like to talk about tips and tricks. It was a journey for a couple of months to work with the VoiceOver, so we have something that we would like to share. I would like to start with some fundamentals. It's the most common accessibility properties is accessible element, indicate whether element is accessible or not. Accessibility label, it's localized strings that identify accessibility element. Accessibility hint, also localized string, contains the brief description of the result of performing an action on the accessibility element, and accessibility traits. Provide the necessary hints. Depending on the context, hints are not always necessary. Sometimes accessibility label already contains enough information. And for example, if you feel or see that accessibility labels already has too much content, it makes sense to move it to the hint. Group accessibility items. This will decrease the amount of swiping through elements on the screen and make it less heavy. On the slide you can see three example how we grouped a few UI elements, and for voiceover it was only one accessible element. Large containers. Sometimes if you have a screen where there are a lot of small views, it's very hard for blind people or for people with the vision impaired to find the necessary element, and it's helpful for them to move them to some containers. Commas create coherency. In this slide, I would like to show you example and what magic commas can give. I don't know if it's yes, exactly the moment when I wanted to make some. So if you have a big string in the text, it's important to make a comma. Then voiceover will be sound as a human, and it will be more easy to hear. I guess I can try to.
Do we need voice from?
Let's try to with laptop, if it will be.
You can try.
Conversation options. Guests on. Services on. Read receipts on. Button.
So it's as a human, and this.
Conversation options. Guests on. Services on. Read receipts on. Button.
Yes, this is what magic commas can make. Add alternative text to images. If you have images on your screen and you want to make them accessible, it's better to put alternative text, otherwise voiceover will read them as image. Notifications. You might need to inform a user about some major UI changes, and in this case UI accessibility notifications can help. I would put the three most common type of notifications: an announcement, layout changed, and a screen changed. When you have some major portion of changes on your screen, it makes sense to use screen changed. If some of the element appearing or disappearing, makes sense to use layout changed. And for example, if some element is going to stay briefly on the screen, then it's better to use announcement. Testing. I put here two different ways. Sometimes you need to test voiceover just without voice and to see how voiceover navigates through the application. This you can mute voiceover with a double tap with 3 fingers. You can use a screen curtain if you want to test with the voice and don't see anything on your screen. This you can do the magic triple tap with 3 fingers on your screen and you will have the curtains. Ideas and tools. We were using for testing Accessibility Inspector and Reveal. Accessibility Inspector, this is a part of Xcode. It's free, and actually we found it's very useful. Reveal is external tool for team. It's not for free, but from our experience, we can say that Accessibility Inspector is enough for the basic thing. And of course, there are many other tools. Make accessibility part of the process. This will create consistency and save your time in a long run. As an example, it can be a checklist when if you create or your colleagues create a new UI element or do some refactoring, it's better to have something that you can check what you should make sure that you don't break or still support everything related to accessibility. Another idea is add to the onboarding process. Then new colleagues will know how to work with the UI elements. Sharing knowledge with the team. It can make sure that everyone is on the same page, and it can increase the bonding of the team. And one of the important slides.
We have one more thing. It wouldn't be like a presentation about Apple platforms without this slide. So we would like to thank everyone who worked tirelessly on this project on the last couple of months, from the designers, QA folks, product managers over at Wire, and of course our Appunite colleagues. It's been a big project, but with the help of everyone involved, we were able to make our product accessible to everyone. Thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions or want to talk accessibility afterwards, we are more than happy to.
I wanted to ask, because you mentioned snapshots, is there any other way you make sure the accessibility stays?
Regarding the UI,
Yeah.
no, we mainly use a snapshot test for that, and it was a pain at the start to make sure we don't break everything, yeah. But mainly, we want to introduce like UI tests at some point, like testing the flows, because sometimes you cannot do that with snapshot tests, but not yet.
Got a question?
Yep.
At a certain point you mentioned you wanted to prevent like large PRs and just create an additional initializer instead of rewriting one.
Yep.
Did you also have like techniques or like deprecations or something like to prevent using the old one?
The old one? Not yet, actually, because we were the only like 3 people working on that, so it wasn't such like a necessity to do so. But since you saw the list already, we have a lot of things that we need to like either deprecate or get rid entirely. But we wanted, so we didn't want to make changes and those changes to apply to the entire app because of the 2 ways of working with color, and also the PRs are going to be huge.
Yeah.
No one would want to review those, so we had to stay focused on like screen by screen basis. So that was the main like motivator.
Yeah, gracefully. Yeah. Deprecating the other one results in 100 warnings.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask what made Wire think that accessibility is important enough to commit quite a lot of work in achieving that. Do you have like huge percentage of the end users that require this kind of features, or was it something else?
Yes, it came from 2 sides actually. The first one was that we got that review, and that was like our initial kind of motivation for the project. But as like more and more people started like joining the project, they saw how important it is, and that we need to like fix all of those things, and even like other issues that we found for all people, mostly because it's the right thing to do, like other.
And I would also add that it's since we received a review from our customers, so it was from their side also push, let's to say like this. And I'm not sure for 100%, but in Germany, our design team gave a presentation that there should be a law, or there will be soon, that they will be more restricted with applications. So Wire decided to start now when we don't have this strict law, but who knows.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Ready? Silence, please. Okay. I get some pizza, so I'm a bit sleepy. You too, so there will be like a 15 minutes. Okay. Now we're gonna see. I don't know. I never did it. My name is Marcin Krzyżanowski, and this is the information about me. You can follow me on Twitter. You can find me on GitHub. I work at Judo. You should check out judo.app. It's the Mac application I work on. It's awesome product. But today I'm gonna talk about virtual machine on macOS. Do we have any DevOps on the audience? Antoine, are you DevOps?
Wannabe.
Well, you know what a GitHub is. And the GitHub Actions. Oh yeah, that's enough.
Rings a bell.
Rings a bell. So what is the virtual machine? The virtual machine is it's a virtual space, right? You kind of sense what a virtual machine is, but what are the products on the market that we can use now? You can maybe interact with. Well, the biggest one is QEMU. I don't know, QEMU. With this generic tool. It begins as the emulator. Now it's kind of works as the emulator and the virtualization stuff. Emulator is when all the translation happens on the software layer, and the virtualization is when the kernel is interacted and some of the instructions run directly on the CPU of the host machine. So the QEMU is huge. It can emulate different architectures. It's not only Intel or ARM, but it's all this PPC, like all the stuff. Very huge. It comes with the application, comes with the command line, it comes with the library that you can embed, use to integrate some of the of your needs. Then there's VirtualBox, Oracle. It's huge, very fast. It's a virtualization product rooted in Java world and Linux world. You know, Oracle is invested in the Sun. Well, I think they invented Sun operating system, but also in Linux. So it's all on the enterprise Unix kind of. Then there's a VMware Workstation and Parallels. Have you ever used VMware to maybe run the Windows? Or Parallels? Yeah, I never used the VMware. I use the Parallels. I like it a lot. Those are virtualization solutions, application that allows you to run Windows on Mac, basically, or the Linux on Mac, or another Mac on Mac. That kind of solution. Parallels has this. The product of Parallels is the tools that are built around it. That means I think they come up first with. Something that they called coherence, that allows you open the Windows window that looks just like your other application, but the integration is very good. But what is not virtualization? The Docker is not a virtualization, with the asterisks on the Mac. But like the Docker and the containers as a solution is not a virtualization, is a containerization. I don't know the word. It's just a container. The container works like in the same host, in the same computer. You slice the system, in this case, with namespaces. and in each namespace, the group of processes runs. They run on the same kernel, but they have the separate space to run on. So the Docker desktop on the Mac, I said asterisk because the container is a kernel solution, it's a kernel feature, and it is available on, you can do that on Linux, but not very much on Darwin, on macOS. So what the Docker company comes up, they offer a solution that is an application that contains emulator or virtual machine that runs Linux, and from that Linux you use the container. They just made it transparent. The Docker machine is an interesting solution that is deprecated now because that was the first product of the Docker. Everyone could use that. It was the infrastructure for the containers, all this, the CLI works like Docker run, some image. And you could use that with any virtual machine. Once they introduced Docker Desktop, they deprecated the Docker machine, so not everyone can well, people still use that, but the intention is, I think, that people should use the Docker Desktop, which is paid after like some tier. I don't know, there's some money in that. The container is a Linux solution for the containerization, like a standard API solution. You don't have to know, but this is something that exists. And the Lima is a virtual machine that integrates this containered API and allows us to run the container on the Mac. Vagrant is an interesting project to orchestrate, not orchestrate in a Kubernetes sense, but like to manage virtual machines on your hosts, like just start, stop. That may be helpful for tests or whatever, like kind of server operation you need. You want UTM, just an example of the application. You can find it on App Store. UTM is it's just a virtual machine application that originated. It was like a wrapper around the QEMU, but like a nice for macOS. So for a long time on macOS there was nothing. Then, like in the terms that we could run the virtualization natively, then there was a hyper. But I remember there was there is still framework View HyperKit, something like this. This is a low-level C framework that allows to run virtual machines on the macOS. And then 3 years ago, Apple announced the virtualization framework and said that everyone should transition to that framework. It's a high-level API framework that allows to run guest machines on a macOS in a most secure and the best in the world fashion. And this is what I'm going to talk about. So I show you the API, how to use that, what else the uses, and yeah. So this one line is the initialization of the virtual machine, and that's all. So this is the instance of the virtual machine. You can have multiple virtual machines, and where the magic goes, it goes in the configuration. Here, the configuration, which is the current slide. The configuration, simple stuff, how many CPU, how many memory, entropy devices is just for the, if you need randomness. But then there is a bootloader. So this machine, this is just like a bare metal machine, but virtual, has to start somewhere. And I'm gonna talk about how to start Linux. There's a VZ Linux bootloader, and there's a bootloader instance for macOS as well. What it needs the kernel of the Linux. You can choose one, and init-erde. If you're not familiar with how the Linux startup process works, at the beginning, the kernel starts, and the init it's initialized. I don't know what's the shortcut. It's a temporary file system that allows to set up the first phase of Linux startup. After that, the system of this big volumes is mount, and then you have all the services. But it's just so you need to those two, and it's maybe not easy to find. So I put the link to how to get one for the Ubuntu, which is the most, I don't know, I think is quite popular server solution, desktop solution, server solution, like the Linux distribution. Here I just download and gunzip, which means unzip, and you can use that with this framework. The thing is, we cannot use the zipped version. Then the command line, that the bootloader has a command line string. If you ever run the Linux, you know that for the bootloader you can provide some attributes that affect how the kernel or the system will boot up. This is that command line, and I put two parameters. One is root. So the root is a device VDA, which is mounted after the init or the phase is over. VDA means virtual something. Virtual like a device, and console HVS0, that means this is a serial console that is standard in the virtualization of the Linux, kind of. I don't know what is the long version of that, but it's, do you know what the serial console is? The serial console is, in a Linux, we have multiple, we may have a multiple consoles. We have this serial when you, it's called serial because in old days you could come with the cable, plug in the machine, and you just roll access, to all the ASCII things that may happen. So, and also with that, next to that there are virtual terminals. Those you can initiate from the software. You can have multiple of that. Anyway, after, this is in the wrong place. The arrow is in the wrong place. It should be over here on the storage. So we need a storage. This is because I had to enlarge that for this screen, and I forgot to move that one. So the storage that will be mounted, and we're gonna put all the software for the Linux. The storage is just an empty zeroed chunk of something on a disk. I use dd. This is a Linux command. It says create 64 gigabytes of nothing and put it into the disk.img. Once I have a path to that, this is on a Macintosh. Macintosh, just nobody used that, right? On a Mac, to the config, I specify, okay, there will be virtual blog device configuration. This is the address. It's not read-only, some caching mode. This is the configuration to the virtual machine. Then, the network, which is quite expected. To set up network, again, there's a class that says something config and attachment. And this attachment, there might be NZNAT network device attachment. That means attach the virtual network device that works in the NAT mode. You know what the NAT is? It's like network address translation, which means that there will be a layer between your host and your guest that translate the address, the IP address, from one space to another. There is a mode where we can skip that and use just attach to the device of the Mac. That requires the entitlements from the Apple. I don't know if anyone ever got that yet. I read that, but somebody said that they applied but never got the response, and Apple said that, oh yeah, it's so niche that there's no process in place, so I don't know. Once we have storage and network, I don't know what is in this slide, so I'll move on. Once we have a storage in a network, we can share resources, like share the directory between host and a guest machine. In that term, to achieve that, the configuration has to know in advance what is the path of the host that will be shared in the guest system. Here I create the shared workspace directory on Mac and said that the tag is Swift Studio, just random name. And yeah, and then there will be it will be visible as a workspace directory. So this Swift Studio name as a tag is important. I'm going to show you in a second. So we have three things. We have storage, we have a network, we have a shared device. Shared device. So we can shared resource. We can start the machine, and start the machine is just like, can we start? Yeah, so start. That's it. That's how it looks in I started the machine. I connect to the serial terminal. I'm on Linux. I just log into root. And now I mount this one of these shared resources. VirtuoFS is a file system, Swift Studio is a tag, and the last path is where do I mount this path. I go there and there's like something from my Mac. I'm on Linux, virtual machine, but I'm running, I can access, I can exchange, I can read, write, whatever I want to the host, the macOS system. With this, well, the file is one way to exchange information with between those hosts. Network is another one, of course. You can use SHD. If you have the IP address, you can SHD and run any command. But there are other ways to kind of have a connection. Here is a console device. That is the virtual console device that can be reachable. That means the host can, the guest, Linux, can write something on this to this console, and that will be saved in this file. I'm going to show you how it works. So it works. This is macOS. This is Linux. Once it boots, it registers this virtual device, and I said hello world, and it's available on Linux right away, and I can do it over and over. I don't know how to if this is very useful, but one of use maybe something. Once the Linux boot and setup, you may want to put something on a console that is helpful for the host, for the Mac, for the host system to connect to this machine, like whatever, right? Something from the configuration of the guest. That was the one-way communication, but it's also possible to have a two-way communication, two-way bidirectional console, and it uses the file handler. If you're familiar with the NS file manager and NS file handler, this is the API that we use. So just attach the pipes, You know the pipe, what the pipe is? The pipe is when you run the command, where was the command, then you may, in Linux, in the Unix world, you may pipe multiple outputs one to another, right? And this is the sign that is, I don't know how it's, something like stick. A pipe. A pipe. So this is why I built the pipe, meaning if this console can write to pipe, and I can read this on the other side. So this is two-way communication. That means I can write to the host and to the macOS at the same time. Maybe that may be my communication channel. Another way to connect is VSOC actually. VSOC is something. This is only Linux thing, and virtualization.framework has a support for that. That means you don't have to know any address. You can start to listen on port on a device, and like establish the connection on a socket, like a BSD sockets level. So it's quite low level, but you can easily have a connection on port. So that means maybe you wanna expose some service on one port, another service on another port, and the macOS can connect to that and have access to this server. I don't know, Nginx or whatever it is. How it works? Socket listener, just socket listener, what port, and then there's a delegate, meaning okay, if the connection happen, just do something. There's a nice tool I use. SoCat. SoCat support this VSOC sockets, and this is the command that allows, without building the tool, just allows us send some data through the network. This 2 number here is a VM address seed host. It's like a well-known value. That means if I put 2, it's like address. If there will be 2. That means I communicate with the host from the guest system. So we have the running machine. You can do whatever you want. It's in the background. But some operating systems comes with the graphic user interface as well. And this is handled by the virtualization framework as well. Very easy. Like API is on a so high level. You get literally you get the view, like this is NS view. And down, right? This is Linux, run on the window of the Mac. The setup is like almost nothing. So there's a graphic device, there's like nothing. Everything looks the same. Graphic device, audio device, keyboard, pointing, that will cover all. That means once you specify those parameters, this view will provide the virtual keyboard, virtual mouse to the virtual machine, and it just works. You have to do nothing. It just works. Yeah, but we all use the M1 now, so it's ARM64. That's great. It's awesome, but sometimes we need to run the x86, and you know what the solution for that is from Apple. It's Rosetta. The Rosetta application on the macOS that allows us run all applications written, build for the architecture of the Intel architecture run on the ARM64. And the same solution is provided to the Linux world. Apple deliver the Rosetta installation, trigger the installation of Rosetta on host, and then share Rosetta directory to the Linux. Why? Because eventually the Linux will run the Rosetta like a wrapper to execute the code. You maybe not familiar with this update bin fms as a Linux. Linux has the idea of magic values that said if the magic is some byte, that means the type of the file is like this. So those magic values means if the magic is elf something, I don't know. Then use Rosetta to actually execute the binary. That means it becomes transparent for anyone, because once you run any application that is built for x86, this operating system feature will handle, call the Rosetta. Rosetta will do its thing and the application will run. So it's awesome. So where to go from there, and why do we may need the virtualization? I mentioned about the GitHub Actions. Now the GitHub Actions require the machine to run, and the GitHub Action can be run in two ways. One is on the GitHub Cloud, but the other one is you can set up the machine on your own, on your iMac, on your laptop, and it will run these actions on your machine. Well, the virtual machine is like made for that. So you set up the GitHub Action runner, set up it with GitHub, and once you push PR, it will trigger your virtual machine to build all the artifacts you need, or tests. Then Docker. It's possible to not use the Docker desktop, this application provided by Docker. You can set up the Docker on your own by spinning up the virtual machine, running Docker in that, and you don't have to care about the Docker desktop product. Container, Lima, all that stuff that may need a virtualization. Tests in the virtual machine. I haven't shown you that we can run the Mac OS, which means if we can run the Mac OS in a virtual machine, we can also set up that to execute application after the startup. Once the application starts, it might be a test suite, something that you use to test your application in an isolated environment, right? And it's super fast. It's really super fast on your laptop. Like my M1 Air, it just works flawlessly. Run Windows, very important thing. And really, with the code I show you, you can run Windows. So there's like a really view and this configuration, and that's all. You have a Windows working. It's amazing. Like I don't know any other API that allows to do that. CI. Similar to the GitHub approach. CI for your own product, for your own project. If you want to do that on a separate machine, you don't have to buy. You know, the cloud is very expensive these days. AWS is very, very expensive. So the virtual machine that runs on your computer is alternative to that. And that concludes my talk. But before we go, we have to wait because this animation has to finish. Yeah, Swift Studio App uses this, uses this solution. So I built a runtime in Linux that in SwiftUI I use to run the application built for Linux. This is the Mac application. I run it in Linux under the hood and just take the output. And it's invisible, super fast to boot. And yeah, this is something I'm working on now. And this is yeah, for good. Thank you. Are there any questions?
I got one.
Yeah.
I think your last slide made it all click. Like I was really wondering, like, why did you start this journey? You know? But what I wonder, and maybe that's actually what you're building. Like if you're developing Mac apps, what is super difficult is to test on older versions, right? I even had like an old Mac Mini just for testing, right? Is that something? Well, I wanted to ask, is that something you think Xcode will build in? But I think I should ask you, like, is that something Swift Studio will support, where I can just test like on older macOS versions?
No, I'm not aware of any of that too.
But is that possible to build?
It is possible.
Because that would be quite a game changer, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, maybe, I don't know, maybe Xcode Cloud uses that. I don't know. Possible. I don't know why they build that. Like, who need that? But yeah, I can imagine a tool that does that. I mean, it runs, there's a Xcode service or nothing, there's just a script on a virtual machine that opens the clone, the repository runs tests and report result back. Yeah, it's feasible.
Would be a good feature for Swift Studio, instant buy.
Yeah.
And another question I had is that I believe there was quite a significant update this year, right?
Yeah, so part of the API I shown is available only on Ventura. I don't.
I think from Girembo as well.
So Girembo, yeah, he built a virtual body application, which is the application that wrap this API in a UI, basically. That he had the download and stuff like that, so visually appealing. I don't know if I have it, so I can move. Like this is virtual body, right?
Yeah.
So you create VM and download and run. I don't have internet. But there are more, the UTM, which looks similar. You just create the virtual machine also. If you select the virtualize, that will use the virtual framework. If you use the emulate, that we use QEMU. And here you can have a selection of systems. Browse for the CD, and it will work as well. So all these applications wrap and works. As far as I know, the virtual body is built especially for the macOS virtualization, but there's no technical obstacle to work on Linux or macOS. Hey,
I'm just wondering whether it's such a game changer that perhaps doing on CI runners will become such an easy thing that it's worth to go that path.
So CI runner may work in a different way. Sometimes CI runner just run the Docker. So you run a container, and container is super fast because container does not spin up the whole machine like the virtual, do not boot. It's running, you just start the process. But I cannot show you, but it's really boot fast and works super fast. So it's invisible. You may want, like it's an option. I don't know if it's good. But given the prices of the AWS, I would consider anything. All right, thank you very much.